I've always said if we reduce the care and services to older adults down to numbers on a spreadsheet, we've lost our morality and the humanity of what we actually do. We need to do more. We need to come up with a plan. We have all these people that are aging. They're going to need services. What's our plan?
Today, I am very, very excited to have our guest, Toby Pearson, who is the president and CEO of Care Providers of Minnesota. Toby, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Joel. Glad to be here.
So Toby, before we dive into anything, I always kind of like to ask a segue question, something to get you thinking outside of the box of what we're going to be speaking about today. So you are the president of Care Providers of Minnesota. That is an awesome title, but what is the title that you hold most dear to your heart for something that you do personally?
The title I hold most dear to my heart is that of dad for my wonderful two daughters who are doing fantastic things, all grown up. One is in Granada, Spain, getting her public health master's, and one I think is on her way to scuba dive the Great Barrier Reef. She's
Oh
been in New
man,
Zealand and Australia for the year doing various things, and I talked to her last night and she said that's where she's on her way to.
that's amazing. That's awesome.
They're fantastic young women.
That's awesome. Well, congratulations. All right, so Toby, let's start simple. How would you describe what Care Providers of Minnesota actually does for senior living communities across the state?
I put it in two big buckets, and it really is on one level very simple. Number one, we do advocacy. So we go to whether it be the state of Minnesota or out to DC, and we advocate for long-term care. We advocate for assisted livings, nursing facilities, of the variety of long-term care services and supports that we provide. The second is we do education. So when the legislature, when CMS, when DC changes things, we bring it back. We say, okay, what does this mean? We translate it, and then we say to our members, here's what it all means. And number two, what's the best practice to implement it and try to educate folks on what happened and how to deal with it.
Wow. Okay. So obviously, the advocacy, the change, the training on the change. What has been that biggest change that you've seen in senior care since you've started in the field?
Well, I've been in the field a while now. Some would say too long, but I just go with a while. A couple of the things that have really changed over the course of the past, probably like 20 years. Number one has been the rise of more of the assisted living type of setting. Minnesota, for example, has been kind of one of the states that's led the way in transitioning towards assisted living.
Mm.
Away, not necessarily away from skilled nursing facilities, but as a interim step between you being in your home, i.e. your house that you may own,
Mm.
transitioning to a different type of home, which is more of a apartment or condo setting, and then receiving services. And then ultimately, once you get to very acute level services, skilled nursing facilities. So when I first started in this in fourth grade and I was volunteering at the nursing facility that my mom was a director of nursing at, you had the little old ladies playing bridge and I'd sit down and play bridge with them. Loved it, but that's not really going on in nursing facilities anymore. And so that
Right.
change from everybody goes to a nursing facility once they're out of the house to that interim step of assisted living, then nursing facility for more acute has been probably one of the biggest changes we've seen. So we went from more of a housing with services model where the services had the license and you had to be a licensed healthcare provider to provide those services to now we have licensed assisted living settings, and with that has brought a whole bunch more regulations. And I think the part that we wrestle with for our members is to make sure that we don't change those what are supposed to be home-like settings, over-regulate them and make them become basically skilled nursing facilities because we need to have more regulations.
Amazing. So bringing assisted living in, obviously, huge change, as you mentioned. How long have you been navigating that change?
I have been with care providers coming up on about 20 years.
Okay.
So we've kind of been navigating that over that course of that amount of
So
time.
pretty much since its inception, assisted living, because I think assisted living became a thing, let's call it that, in the mid 90s ish. Does that sound about right?
And that's where a lot of people started to look at, in essence, folks were looking around and saying, I don't necessarily want to go to a nursing facility, but I
Right.
can't stay in my home. So what can I do?
Right.
And the market was kind of demanding more home-like settings. People preferred it. So the concept of assisted living or housing with services kind of sprouted up. Different states have taken it to a different level, depending on kind of state preference, but
Hmm.
that has definitely been one of the areas that we've seen the most change over probably the last 20 years.
Awesome. So how does your team help communities deal with all the new rules and regulations that seem to come out every year?
To us, they seem to come out like every week.
Yeah, I was gonna say every week. Yeah, exactly.
Well, I mean, you get a bunch of lists that you get on, so everybody communicates what the change is. I think the two things that we really try to focus on is one is our partnership with our national affiliate. So we're AHCA and NCAL. So they do some stuff to help us with here's the list that you need to be on, here's the changes that are coming or just happened. And then we sit down, we have different folks on our staff that are responsible. If it's a change more in the assisted living context, we have an assisted living person who's in charge of that regulatory context. We have a nursing facility person who's in charge of that regulatory context. And then we have an attorney who works with us to look at kind of the legal implications of all the changes. The nice thing we have here on our staff is the people who are in charge of doing that for us were actually practitioners. So the assisted living person actually ran assisted livings for a number of years before she decided to come to us and become the regulatory person in charge of it. The nursing facility person similarly ran nursing facilities before she came to us and decided to be on the regulatory side of things. So people that have been in those shoes can look at the new regulations and say, okay, if I was in an assisted living or if I was in a nursing facility, what would I need to know? And how would I want to communicate it? And so we sit down, we go through that, and then we communicate it out to folks, what they need to know and how it should be communicated to them.
Amazing. So with that, when you talk about this type of stuff with like state regulators or you're in DC or whatever else, what's the biggest message you want them to hear from providers?
I think the biggest message that we bring to the regulators is don't do it in a vacuum. That if you're going to make these changes, there may be unintended consequences. So, for example, we here at Care Providers in Minnesota, we have, it's probably bi-weekly now, meetings with our regulatory agencies where we can sit down and say, here's what we're seeing from the field, here's what our members are telling us, here's what the implications of some of these regulations that you've passed or continue to try to enforce are. We think there's a better way and try to have an open communication, but it shouldn't happen in a vacuum where it's a bunch of people sitting in an office talking about what should be without the actual practitioners being present to say, here's how that's going to roll out.
We have organizations outside of Minnesota who often end up going to DC and arguing about specific, regulations and things like that on behalf of their own organizations and of course the industry abroad. Do you have partners like that in Minnesota, and are there opportunities to bring partners like that in from your market to support what you guys are trying to, what bills you're trying to push and things like that?
On the state, we do have kind of business partners that'll come in and talk about like the business case of things.
Okay.
On the federal level, really we focus on the federal connections to our state of Minnesota
Okay.
congressional and or Senate folks. So we will go out to DC. I was just out there a couple of weeks ago talking to a couple of our state senators about the implications of different things that they were considering. Um, we do, every year we have our quote unquote congressional days where we go in and do our congressional briefing and meet with all the congressional and Senate folks. one of the things that's nice about Minnesota anyway, is that our congressional and state Senate folks, they still like to meet with us personally, whether it's just for 5 minutes, just to say hi and say, hey, we see you're here from Minnesota. Thanks for coming out. Now talk to my staff about all the changes you want. But we still do have kind of that personal connection with a lot of folks because we work hard here in the state to have those connections. And then they translate out to DC when we go to visit. We get to talk to, the senator and the staff, or the congressional person and the staff.
Awesome. Speaking of staff, but on a completely different note, staffing, that's a constant struggle in the senior living space and everywhere else. So what's working right now to attract and keep great caregivers from what you're seeing?
The hardest part right now that our members face, as you point out, is the staffing. And we have kind of a juxtaposition of two things, which is the demographics. So we're an aging society, whether we want to admit it or not. As I come up on 60, I certainly feel like I'm aging every single day. But when we look at the actual age of baby boomers, when they start to actually need cares, we're just now on the precipice of the big numbers of baby boomers coming in to need cares. Simultaneously, we have fewer and fewer young people who would be able and willing to actually provide the services or the cares that they need. This especially is true in greater Minnesota for us, or rural communities across the nation, which is that the younger folks don't stick around in those smaller rural communities as much as they used to.
Right.
Their parents and their grandparents are still there because they still are connected there and they still want to receive their services there. So what we've been finding, I mean, we've tried a lot of the things that everybody tries, things like, can we do more, scholarships for folks to go to either the local community college to get their training, or the local college? Can they do it online? Are there different ways to try to incent people to get, stay in the neighborhood, so to speak, and provide the cares? We've also worked a lot with new Americans, recruiting new Americans into long-term care. There's a lot of folks that are newer Americans that it's a great entryway to like a healthcare field where there's a growing need and demand for services for folks. Ultimately, whether we like it or not, a lot of what it comes down to is we are very dependent on the Medicaid rates for what we can pay our workers. And so one of the things we're constantly advocating for is to try to improve the Medicaid rates to nursing facilities and for services in assisted living, so that that translates to higher wages and benefits for workers.
Right.
The hard part is, again, the demographics come in. That gets very expensive very quickly because there's a lot of older adults that need services, and it's only going to grow.
Okay. Let's talk about Medicaid. Let's talk about funding. Let's talk about all that stuff. Uh, do you think Minnesota is getting closer to finding a sustainable way to fund senior care, or are we still a long way off?
I think we are a long way off from a legislator and administration standpoint right now. I'll be blunt, I don't think there's any plan. And for something that we've known for years and years is coming, it seems a little short-sighted to not actually have a plan on what we want to do for long-term care moving forward. I've always said if we reduce the care and services to older adults down to numbers on a spreadsheet, we've lost our morality and the humanity of what we actually do.
Yeah.
And yet that seems to be where we are.
Yeah.
Everybody looks at the spreadsheet and says, boy, this is going to start to cost more. What are we going to do about it? And we come in and say, if you want to pay people living wages and benefits, and you have this many more people needing the services, it is going to cost more.
Right. They're forgetting the human component of not just the caregiver, but also the resident themselves.
They're forgetting everything. It comes up in three different ways in my mind. One, access on the front end. if I'm an older adult, do I actually have access to the services I need? And if we don't pay wages and benefits, if the state isn't willing to have Medicaid rates that pay enough in wages and benefits, we're going to lose access for people from the community that need the help. Another way it shows up is hospitals. Hospitals trying to discharge folks. You go in, you have a hip replacement, you have a knee replacement, you have some service that you need, and then you need to go somewhere to rehab for a little while before you go home. We can't accept patients coming out of the hospital because we don't have the workers, because we can't pay enough, because hospitals actually pay way more for nurses and nursing assistants than nursing homes can
Of
because their
course.
payment is different. It's not all tied to Medicaid.
Right.
And the third way, and this is the one that, so you're affecting the families on the front end, whether or not they have access. You're affecting families that need services coming out of a hospital. And then you're affecting the workers themselves in that if workers themselves aren't getting paid fair wages and benefits, why would they want to stick around in that profession if they don't see a ladder to move up? So
Right.
it's tough. It's tough from my perspective to go in every year to the legislature and say, we need to look at this. We need to do more. We need to come up with a plan. We have all these people that are aging. They're going to need services. What's our plan? And for the legislature to kind of basically say, well, we have a 2-year budget and that's all we're going to deal with.
So we're talking about access. We're talking about baby boomers who are tech savvy seniors. How do you see technology, things like telehealth or monitoring tools, change the day-to-day life in senior communities?
We've seen pretty big changes with it, some for good and some for not so good. So, for example, one of the things that we talk about quite often is the agency of the individual. Older adult, just because they're older and they might be making different choices than the children would want, they still have agency over, for example, whether or not you put a camera in their room. So
Right.
there might be a reason that the older adult doesn't want a camera in their room, but the family feels like, boy, I'd really like to have a camera in their room. So how do you go through a process to evaluate who gets to make that decision? That was a
Mm.
long conversation we had as a state a couple of years back. That type of agency for older adults and society's willingness to take the agency away from older adults really kind of cuts in two different ways. The advantage that we've seen is that you can, in fact, do more remote visits to doctors, for example. So you don't have to necessarily leave your assisted living or your nursing facility in order to go and quote unquote see a doctor, right? If you have an iPad or if you have any sort of device that can transmit, you can hold it up and they can see things and they can kind of do a lot more triaging and keep you aging in place easier with the technology. So there's huge advantages to technology. And there are some, like what I said, the agency wrestling with ageism kind of implications for technology use as well.
Mm. So can you share a story where care providers in Minnesota really made a difference for a member community, a community that's a member of care providers, I should say?
Well, we like to think there are tons of them, but I like to point to a couple different, um, more personal ones. So one of the things we do at Care Providers with our foundation is we provide scholarships and grants to individuals. Some are mini grants, some are bigger scholarships so that they can do more education stuff. But we've had a number of our member facilities apply for scholarships for workers that they have. And we have been tracking one particular worker. I'm not going to mention their name, but they started out, and we're just going through this process right now. So this is why it came to my mind. Started out 10 years ago, and they wrote in and they wanted a mini grant scholarship so that they could possibly take a CNA job. And the employer said this would be great. They're a new American. They are a very caring individual. So we said, all right, here's X amount of money to try to look into taking the CNA position, education position. They ended up getting us partnered with a scholarship from the facility, so they ended up getting their CNA. 4 years later, they said, well, we want to do something in the next step for that exact same person. So, long story short, this person ends up getting scholarships at various different times over the last 10 years, ends up getting their RN at the end of it, almost paid for entirely between matching of care providers in Minnesota and the employer to become an RN, and now they're going to be a director of nursing at the facility. They have also recruited 10 of their friends over the 10 years. So basically, one every year has come in and started working with them. So it's a way in which we have tried to, one, cultivate more folks into the caring profession, two, not have it cost so much in order to get to the RN level, which is what there's a huge need for. And then three, just the word of mouth helping the workforce and helping recruit more new Americans into the workforce has been something really special to watch for that particular community.
I love that. And I love the idea of the scholarships. So that obviously shows a strong future in that regard. But what gives you the most hope about the future of senior living in Minnesota?
I think it's the people that do the cares.
Yeah.
It really is. At the end of the day, the people that are providing the cares to the seniors, I mean, everybody makes mistakes once in a while, but they're just such big-hearted people trying to do the right thing to take care of our seniors. We have a moral obligation to take care of them. These people are willing to do the hard work to get there and to do it. Whenever I go into a facility or an assisted living and I get to walk around and talk to the people who are actually providing the cares, it gives me a lot of hope for change in a positive way for how we care for seniors in the future.
Awesome. My final question for you. If you could fix one thing about how this system works today, what would it be?
Only one?
Only one.
I don't, limiting it to just one is really, really tough. I think the one thing, if I'm going to pick across kind of the whole continuum of care, I would say the one thing I would fix is to de-silo the whole system.
Hmm.
And what I mean by that is we have a bunch of people who are very concerned about just assisted living or just skilled nursing facility or just PCA services in people's homes and their houses, or just whether or not seniors can, have a walkable way to get to the store or age in place or have an age-friendly. I think if everybody could get out of just their own box and start to look at it from a broader universal perspective, we would all be better served.
Toby, you're a very cool guy, and I appreciate everything that you're doing for care providers in Minnesota and the care providers of Minnesota with that. So thank you so much for everything that you're doing, and thank you for joining us on Cup of Joe. For those of you watching at home or in your offices or what have you, if you have questions for myself or for Toby, you can reach out directly. My email is joe@citizen55.com. And my phone number is 403-903-3703. And I'd be happy to put you in touch with Toby. Thank you so much, Toby, for joining. And if you have any last minute things that you'd like to mention, feel free to do that.
No, thanks a lot, Joe. I appreciate the invitation to be here. Always good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too. Thank you.